thank you to GCM Grosvenor and Resolute Investment Managers Inc. for sponsoring Series 3 of 2025. GCM Grosvenor is a global alternative asset management firm with a long-standing commitment to supporting small, emerging and diverse investment managers. For over 30 years, the firm has developed expertise in funding and guiding these managers as part of its broader activity across alternative investments. With over 20 billion in assets under management dedicated to small and emerging managers and 16 billion in assets under management dedicated to diverse managers, GCM Grosvenor leverages its experienced team, broad network and proprietary sourcing capabilities to support their success. Through the Small, Emerging and Diverse Manager Programme, the firm creates opportunities for investors to access a wide range of talent while seeking to drive strong returns and impact. Resolute Investment Managers Inc. is a diversified multi-affiliate asset management platform that partners with over 30 best-in-class affiliated and independent investment managers. Its unique platform delivers strategic value through a full suite of distribution, operational and administrative services available to affiliates and partners.
My advice to my younger self, which I would have completely disregarded, is that do something worthwhile. I think you learn that at a later point. And I don't just mean for personal satisfaction, but I also think that it provides security in your life and in your career. If you are doing something that is valuable to somebody else, there will be a demand for it. There will be an ongoing demand for it. Of course, the world changes and adapts, but fundamentally, people are going to want to do business with you. They're going to want to know you. And that may seem very obvious, but I think a lot of people, it's not that obvious. People often have a sort of zero-sum game attitude to things. And I'm going to win at someone else's expense. I think that probably was my mentality at a very young age. And that's actually not consistent with sort of long-term success.
I'm Aoife Devitt, and welcome to the 50 Faces podcast, a podcast committed to revealing the richness and diversity of the world of investment by focusing on its people and their stories. I'm joined today by Stuart Dunbar, who's a partner at Baillie Gifford based in Edinburgh, where he has worked since 2003. He previously held a range of institutional marketing roles. Welcome, Stuart. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks very much. Great to be here.
Well, can you start by talking about your background, starting with where you were born, where you grew up, what you studied, and how the world of investing made itself known to you?
Yeah, sure. So I was an unusual convert to the world of investing. So I grew up in a country town in Scotland, went to the local grammar school, figured that I'd go and do something. I thought I was going to be an accountant, actually. So I went off, I'd finished school, went off to university. I actually did finance and law, which is unusual at Baillie Gifford, where obviously I work. We don't generally have a lot of finance grads, but I did that. So at that point, I had developed an interest in finance, but then I thought I'd go and be an accountant, very traditional. My parents thought that would be a good idea. Did train to be an accountant, but then quite quickly figured I thought this is not for me. I think in a great example of how life just, isn't necessarily planned. My then girlfriend was a musician. She got a job in the Hong Kong Philharmonic Orchestra, and that seemed terribly exotic. So I just quit my job and went, much to the dismay of lots of people around me who thought that was a crazy thing to do. I didn't know anything about finance, but I suspect I was interested in getting into it for entirely the wrong reasons. The 1980s is the world of red braces and people driving Porsches, and at the age of 23, that seemed to be quite appealing in my young naivety. So I got a job as a statistician with a company called Thornton Investment Management in Hong Kong. That would now be, some sort of performance and risk analyst or something, but this is how long ago this was. But I think I probably went for that job partly because it was interesting and partly, as I say, for the wrong reasons. But then once you get there, I think then start to figure out how the whole world of finance fits together. Where does asset management fit into that? And actually start to figure out what the purpose of asset management is. I think it's nonsense to say when I was 23 I wanted to make the world a better place. I didn't. That's not what you care about when you're 23, or at least not me. But fast forward 30 odd years and you come to realise the importance of what we do in the capital asset allocation job. And there's an awful lot of people who rely on our industry to create the wealth that's actually going to pay the pensions or deliver the investment returns. But that came later. I think it makes me laugh when, people say from the age of 15 they wanted to make the world a better place by financing businesses. I don't really think that's the case.
Well, thanks for keeping it real there. Before we get into the mission and purpose of asset management, which I think is a fascinating part of this discussion, and paint a picture of Hong Kong in the 80s. I lived there in the late 90s.
Yeah.
So it must have been, I would say there's a fairly high energy.
Yeah, so So old as I am, I was there from 93 to 98, and it's a fantastic place to be when you're still pretty young and full of energy. I wouldn't want to suggest I'm not now, of course, but there was a real buzz about it. It was a work hard, play hard sort of place. A huge buzz about it. At that time, it was still technically British, but obviously very Chinese. One great expat community, but also a lot of, lots of local people that I met and worked with when I was there that I got to know and had a great time with. You'd work 5.5 days a week. It was full on. I had the opportunity to do some nice stuff at weekends, like hiking or go out in the traditional junk and do a bit of water skiing. Just a real buzz. I mean, to this, I guess it's changed a bit now, but even now, I'm sure if you want to go somewhere where there's just a liveliness and a can-do attitude, I don't think my career would have moved as quickly as it did had I not gone to Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, if you work hard, they'll give you opportunity and you keep going until you sort of run out of talent or something. So I had a wonderful time. And, the social side of it was great. I still think it's there. I mean, there's a whole other conversation perhaps about the development of some of these so-called emerging economy. Hong Kong's obviously not an emerging economy, but just Asia is. You can't go to Asia and not get a smile on your face at the sheer exuberance of the place. And I think that's the case now, and that was the case back then. And anyone who's early in their career and wants to go and experience it, and that should just go.
I think I've heard others describe Dubai and the Middle East as having a similar energy now. And my apologies, I misheard you say the 80s. Of course, it wasn't the 80s, it was the 90s. So
don't worry, I know. I probably look like I'm that old.
So moving in now to your role at Baillie Gifford, and you talked about the evolution of your realization, I suppose, around asset management and its importance. Can you tell us what your role is there and what's on your mind today as you execute that?
Yeah, sure. So I've been here for a while now. I'm now in charge of sort of product and sales and distribution in our firm. That goes quite deep. So I'm on our, various management groups and whatnot. So I feel like I get pretty good oversight of what's going on in the firm and including on the investment side. I've done a few roles over the years. I've looked after consultant relationships. I've looked after clients. I've been involved in various different investment strategies. So it's been a very interesting path for me. The stuff that's on my mind now, gosh, where to begin? But I'll go in a few different directions and then see which seems to be interesting. I mean, the evolution of savings channels, I think, is fascinating. Our business, as with so many, started as a pension fund business. Life used to be easy. You have relationships with consultants. If they like you, they put you in front of clients, you pitch, you win some money, and it was very straightforward. That still exists, but it's much less than it used to be. So how we interact with different client channels is something that's a constant challenge. I think this is general stuff. I don't want to talk too much just about our firm, but as like everyone else, we've had to start to tap into wholesale channels and financial intermediaries channels and sovereign wealth funds. And I mean, even now, I don't really know how we active managers tap into defined contribution schemes. It doesn't happen very much. It's all about cost. Actually, I think that's a real issue and a challenge. But from a business point of view, it's how do we stay relevant to the evolving savings channels? I think we're moving into a post-pension fund world. Not for a very long time and very gradually. But if you look at where savings flows are now, it kind of comes back to the Asian point. It's much more individual. These flows are coming from different places and we have to work hard to be in front of them. So I think all companies like ours, it's how are you building relationships? How are you modeling your client services for what is very often someone who themselves has an underlying client? How do you work with private banks, for example? So we're having to get our heads around all of that sort of stuff. And then I think it's difficult at the moment. An awful lot of people seem to have forgotten the basic purpose of what we're trying to do. And the reason that's problematic is time horizons shorten. People start to focus on benchmark relative performance. It becomes an exercise in numbers and prices and patterns rather than an exercise in capital allocation. And when that happens, people start to measure success in ways that I think are quite unhelpful and in turn drive people to make sort of poor decisions. And so I think something that's on my mind at the moment is the education of savers, of our client base, of people who might be our clients, is what are we actually getting paid to do? And for me, that's all about capital allocation and engagement and oversight. And, it's not just policing, it's enthusiasm and motivation and long-termism. And I sort of worry that the whole investment industry has become sort of gamified to the point where it's actually, of course, there are sensible, thoughtful people out there, but an awful lot of it is just time horizons just keep on shortening. And that to me is a worry. And it's not, it's a worry on a small scale because what does that mean for active managers like our firm? But it's actually a worry on a much bigger and more important scale, which is the whole financial system just starts to dysfunction quite badly. So I've been writing some stuff on that, talking to clients about it. Occasionally, when someone lets me stand on a stage, I'll talk about these things. I do feel that our industry has to make an effort, particularly the active industry, has to make an effort to restate that what we do actually carries value. It's not just be different than an index and hope it works out better.
That's really fascinating. I had loads of things to pick up on there. First one is this idea of a post-pension fund world. And I think certainly the traditional DB structures probably have their days numbered, although still some are open. And I suppose, what does serving a DC plan look like, since we know that they are growing rapidly, 100 million a year, I think, in some cases, one large UK one. Do you think the engagement piece, which can be maybe missing some links there, are you engaging with the underlying beneficiary? Are you engaging with the provider of the DC plan? How do you tackle, say, the DC investor?
Yeah, I think that's it. I don't think anyone's got a good answer to that, and I don't either. I drive my colleagues nuts by constantly trying to push them to say, how do we get to the end investors? Because I think, we all know that the vast majority of investors default. We know that the way the DC system works at the moment, and it shouldn't, but it does, is fiercely focused on price. So pretty much everything goes passive. So we're just not in the conversation. I mean, there are exceptions. Of course, we do have a DC business, but in general, it's just not the way people think. There are DC plans in which the total cost of admin and investment is 10 or 12 basis points. And it seems self-serving, but there's the problem. I would argue that's an over-focus on cost at the expense of quality and long-term investment returns. So how do we tackle that? We engage with the people that run DC schemes. We engage with consultants. We try to find ways to help them report to end clients. And I think that can make a difference. I think there is a strong desire. There's obviously kind of a generational thing where everyone who's young pretty much is going to be in a DC scheme. And I think they do care about purpose and how their capital is being deployed, but only in as much as you can get them to engage on the subject. I mean, here's the thing. I was interviewing people this week for our trainee intake. And these are people who want to work in an investment company. And when you ask them in places that you've previously worked, what decisions did you make around your pension scheme? And I don't think any of them knew where the money was invested. And these are people that want to work in investment companies. They're interested. So when you talk about engagement, we're not having nuanced discussions about the correct level of resource to engage with companies to exercise oversight. We're talking about people that actually haven't got a clue where their money is invested. So how do we do better? I think we all just have to push, maybe think about the channels we use. Do we have to get more stuff on YouTube? I think we need to try and work in partnership with the DC providers, the big admin platforms. Can we help them to better educate end investors about what it's all about? I mean, there is an argument, I'm pretty sure somebody will be listening to this and saying, you've got it completely back to front, Stuart. The best thing you can do is not remind people they've got a pension scheme, because they'll just hurt themselves by buying and, trading it. There's truth in that too. So I have totally not given you an answer to your question, but I'm kind of in the camp that says if anyone knows the answer, speak up. More realistically, it's just a real challenge.
Well, maybe the answer is there is not yet an answer, but I think one of the areas that was seen as being a lifeline for active management for a while was the idea of sustainable investing and investing with impact and investing with purpose. But just today, as we're recording this, I saw the news of Make My Money Matter, for example, closing down, and maybe the messaging getting lost in translation, or maybe misfiring and no longer having the resonance it used to. Do you think that could be any part of the message to DC plan holders? And then more broadly, what is Baillie Gifford's position around impact investing with a sustainable focus?
On the first one, I think it is an important part of the message. And again, it's not fair to say it's generational. It's funny, and as an aside, people who really believe in sustainable investing, I think it's quite barbell. It's younger people who care what the state of the world is going to be in their lifetimes. And it's old people who care what the world is going to be like for their grandchildren. It's the ones in the middle that seem to be more focused on, I don't care what you do, just make me money. So, yes, I think that's in DC, that's part of it, is this. You can use your capital to achieve something positive for society. I actually do think there's a strong sort of grassroots view. That's what we should be trying to do. The challenge of it is always how do you translate that into action? And it almost goes back to this. People know what they want, but they're not engaged enough to actually get there. I mean, I think we need to be really honest with ourselves. I think sustainable investing is just long-term investing, and it's odd that we've decided to put badges on what was always just sensible long-term thinking. If you invest in companies that are wrecking the planet and ruining their own reputations, then they're probably not very good companies long-term. That's just an investment topic. Impact is different. Impact is, in theory, are you willing to forgo investment returns to achieve something positive for society? Now, I think some people will do that. And again, people will be screaming, you can do both, do well by doing good. I think we're a little bit dishonest with ourselves around some of that. I think if you really want to have a dual objective and you really want to do good, then you probably constrain your opportunity set, and all else equal, it makes achieving returns more challenging. Maybe we should just be a bit more straight with ourselves about that and allow people to make a choice rather than you don't have to make a choice because we can give you it all in one pretty box. So maybe there's a funny way of looking at it, but I actually think it's problematic. I think if you give people a clear choice, they can choose to make it. And, how do we get that message out? In terms of how do we think about this as a firm, I mean, my starting point on this is we're an agency business. We've got to do what our clients want us to do, and our clients do not have one view about what does sustainable investing look like and what should you do beyond thinking about investment returns. So for the majority of clients, however much there's discussion around this, investment returns are still first and foremost. The way that we invest, that's naturally compatible with sustainable investing. It's back to my point about it's just long-termism. And then there are some clients who have, where we've specifically agreed we'll go a bit further on the engagement front or emissions front. I get slightly worried about the ESG discussion being reduced to an exercise in point-in-time metrics. And it's really not that. It's an exercise in ongoing improvement. And so blunt exclusions, however well intended, I don't think are the right way to do it. In a practical sense, as a firm, we've hired literally dozens of people in the last few years to increase our understanding of these sustainability and environmental issues. But it's really, again, I would see that as part and parcel of just doing the fundamental research job to allow us to understand the challenges that companies have. I hope what happens is this all settles down into a less controversial place. The underlying problem here is, particularly on the environmental one, is a lack of political consensus. It's not realistic to expect the finance and investment sector to compensate for failures of the political system. And again, we should just be a bit more honest about that. We can do our best. We do have influence. We use our clients' capital. That brings us influence. We can allocate it wisely. We can try and encourage behaviours in companies that we think are appropriate. But in the absence of regulation that actually forces people to align with reducing emissions, I mean, we're not on track for net zero 2050, probably. So that becomes more and more inconsistent. Investing for that scenario becomes less consistent with generating long-term investment returns. So I personally think shouting at each other doesn't help very much. It's not a black and white thing. We've just all got to push in the right direction and accept that there are different approaches to this, different pathways. And I think we need to sort of look long and hard at the regulatory side, which I don't think is moving fast enough. But then if I was a politician, I wouldn't be, how are you going to get elected by imposing costs on an electorate that cost money now but don't benefit people for 50 years? There's just a basic sort of alignment problem. So we've just all got to keep sort of shoving in the right direction and we'll eventually get there.
And I think definitely being a part of that conversation. And one of the things I want to ask you about, you mentioned the new hires you've made in this domain, but equally looking at talent today, there's one school of thought which suggests that asset management is moving more from being a kind of product delivery to service delivery. And I think we spoke about this, building the partnership. What would be your thoughts on that? And maybe if you were to kind of put your crystal ball in front of you now and think of the 5 years' time, how will these interactions with clients take place? Like, will there be more in the post-pension world with the large institutional investors, the large consolidated funds, the sovereign wealth funds? How will the conversation take place?
So I think there is a bit of tailoring. We've always been quite resistant to doing multiple variants of strategies because we think it's a bit of a distraction from the job of company research. But we've had to lighten up on that a bit. We actually created a solutions team quite recently. It's not a sort of LDI type thing that a lot of other firms are doing. It's just a flexible capability to construct portfolios that are bespoke for clients out of companies that we already own in different investment strategies. So that's a sort of change from our point of view. And I think it's an acknowledgement that there's reducing homogeneity amongst our client base. They've all got little tweaks about what it is they want us to do or what the risk tolerance is or what they want to include and exclude. So we just have to be in a position to deal with that. I mean, one of the really scary things is how far does that go? So I know in the US already we get these sort of individually tailored portfolios, and that's a huge exercise in data processing so people can have exactly what it is that they personally want. And I think the world's probably going to go in that direction. Quite what it means for firms like ours, I haven't figured out yet. We need to not get distracted by the literally millions of ways in which you can assemble indices to deliver people what they want. We need to focus on deploying capital in the real world in companies. So I'm slightly daunted, actually, by where tailorization takes us, if that's a word. I think we have to play into that. We have to find systematic ways of dealing with it. But I think there's a limit to how far we should go. I mean, I like to go around telling, there are now something 4 million indices, which is about whatever, 50 times more than there are stocks. And I know what the reasons for that are. It's because of this ability to infinitely fine tune everything. But it just doesn't make any sense, does it? Just, step right back and fundamentally, where's the sense in that? That's not what our job is supposed to be. So tailoring, yes, but let's not lose sight of the sort of fundamental purpose of what it is we're trying to do. I see that evolving. Certainly on the institutional side of the business, for many years, it's about relatively high touch engagement. Go and see your clients quarterly or whatever it is that they want us to do. We have a large team of people in our clients department, and that's their job. And I don't think that's going to disappear, I should say. But I think the investment management industry has actually been quite backwards on interactivity and digitalization. I sometimes, why is it every time I pick up my phone, Amazon seems to know what I'm doing before I do it? And in the investment management industry, we're really not very far down that road at all of how we actually interact with clients and make information available on demand. So I think we have to work harder to have that baseline digital servicing, and that's much more important in a world where end investors are closer to what we're doing. It's not just sort of buried in the back of a DB pension scheme. So we're working hard on that. So digital delivery, I think, really matters. Using they're not new, are they? But using different channels to deliver to clients, whether that's posted stuff on, LinkedIn or whatever it may be. I think that we're going to work really hard on the digital side. But we like to talk about digital too, not digital instead. I think that's where we are at the moment. And it's expensive, actually, because you end up running two different approaches to client service at the same time. But I think that's what we need to do.
I think there's tailoring at every level. I think that's right. Not only the product level, but at the communication level and how clients like to be, what kind of learners they are, what kind of investors they are, how they absorb information. Moving on to discuss the team and feeling maybe fish out of water at Baillie Gifford by having the finance background, given there's a tendency to hire from across the board. Talk to me about the diversity in Baillie Gifford and maybe how you think the industry is evolving to meet the need there.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you a positive and then less positive take on this. So I think we've made a lot of progress. When people talk about diversity, what are we talking about? Race, gender, things that are easily measurable. And I think we have made progress in our firm. I mean, we've given a lot of thought to, it's not just who do you hire, it's how do you keep people and what environment are you offering? I mean, we found for quite a long time we were, give or take, 50-50 in terms of recruitment, but our retention of females was worse than our retention of males. So you've got to go and look at these things and say, what's causing that? Is there I'm pretty sure it's not cultural, but it must be procedural in some way. Is there some way in which this is just a more difficult environment for certain people? So I think you've got to go deeper than just, well, we're doing our best, we're hiring 50-50. And then I think you need to drill beyond that as well. One of the things that concerns me, we're trying to address this, is this sort of social diversity and cognitive diversity. So we've got something, I don't know what it is, we've got 48 different nationalities in our investment team, I think. And that's great, and that does bring difference of perspective. I sort of hesitate to say this, I'll get in trouble, but the challenge is if they all went to Ivy League blue chip universities and did finance degrees, which they didn't, I hasten to add. But, that's the challenge our industry has, is we look for diversity as an input, not an output. So I think you've got to go and look a bit further than that. I think you've got to try and find people from completely different backgrounds, perhaps who have had alternative career paths. I mean, a bit of real world experience, I think, is quite a useful addition to an investment team. So it's this sort of, we started an apprentice program, actually, not for our investment teams, but in our ops area. And I think that's wonderful. I love the idea that in theory, someone could join us as an apprentice and become the chief exec in 25 years' time. Now, I don't know whether that's real or not, but that's how we should be thinking. I think the sort of bog standard, did well at school, did well at a blue chip university, went to work in finance thing, that's actually the diversity question, in my opinion, much more so than the rest of it.
Very interesting. And I think that apprenticeship scheme, I think we should check in again in 5 years or so and see how that's going, because I think very promising start, certainly. And I suppose, like anything, it's about the nurturing that goes on post the entry. The entry is great. And
Yes, yeah.
but I think, that ensuring that it's successful also takes a lot of breathing of life into it as well along the way.
But let me give you one example of that. We moved, I think we may have been the first to do this, certainly in our industry, but quite pioneering, to equal parental leave for men and women about 4 or 5 years ago or something. And the whole point of that is to take away one of the inequalities in career progression. So why doesn't everyone take time off and then everyone's equal? And also, it's probably just the right thing to do. But we're nowhere near it actually working in practice. Men just don't take time off. Women do, you might say, because they have to. So you can try and do the right things, but you can't change society single-handedly. You can't change culture. So again, it's back to this, let's try and do what we can do, but there's still some really big sort of behavioural, cultural traditions out there that are quite hard to challenge.
That's very interesting. And I could go into a rabbit hole about that, I'm sure, but I think I'm just going to let that data point just sit there and let our listeners dwell on why. I'd love to now go back to some personal reflections. So you spoke about your journey and the wild life in Hong Kong in the early 90s and how then you've come, I suppose, to find the purpose of what we do, but it's a constant journey, clearly. Looking back at the course of the career so far, were there setbacks and challenges, maybe getting it wrong, backing a product that didn't tend to meet the need, or backing the wrong person, the wrong team? Anything that was a setback that you learned lessons from?
Oh, well, I mean, I've done a million things wrong in my career, so I think we should all recognise that. I think you've got to separate, did you do things wrong or did you have a bad outcome? And that's not the same thing. When you did things right, but it didn't work, that's okay. You can learn from that. You can say, was there something we should have known that we didn't look at? Was it actually a mistake? When you just mess up, the main thing there is just you got to be completely open, transparent, face up to it. I think the worst thing you can do on this is we should always be learning all the time. I find that, again, I get in trouble internally because, there's this, make yourself better, go send yourself off to some course that does this and that. And I just don't want to do that. I don't think that's a learning mindset, is you learn all the time, every day. And it's quite difficult, in my view, to sort of formalize that. So to answer your question, I think it's think hard about what you're good at, what you're not good at. Think hard about actually how your team fits together. People have different skills. I'm not very good at whatever it may be. Go off on a course and get better at it. Well, how about that's just a really daft idea? How about someone else who's good at that does that and I focus on what I'm good at? So I think this is slightly tangential to your question, but I think this is sort of how you create functional teams really matters. And if you do that, you're less likely to make genuine mistakes and you're in a better position probably to learn from them. And then the other thing is, when something bad stuff happens, don't go and shoot people. Because if you do that, they'll become risk averse and lack transparency. So you got to create a culture in which when you mess up, the first thing you do is tell everyone you've messed up. And then people will rally. It's amazing how people will rally around behind you to solve whatever mess you've inadvertently caused.
I love that. I have spoken with Baillie Gifford about psychological safety at the firm. And I think that certainly is one of the clear hallmarks, is the ability to admit mistakes without fear of recrimination. So I love that. Speaking then about people staying on the theme and mentors, did you have any particular mentors or guides that influenced your career?
Yes, quite a number, but all in their own small ways, which for me, that's how it's worked out. So, going back, I'll give you 2 or 3, I'll name check a couple of them and not other ones. So back in the early days in Hong Kong, I worked for a guy called Mark Conan, who is now Group CIO of AIA, and I'm sure he doesn't mind me name checking him. Fascinating guy, very clear thinking, quite driven, who I think taught me about the sort of commercial reality of our business. So again, as a youngster, I think you need to know that as you learn that we have purpose and all the rest of it. But asset management is a business. You've got to make the machine work. You've got to write good RFPs. You've got to know what you're talking about. You've got to be clear in your process and philosophy. And he taught me a lot of that. So you might say that was basics, but my goodness, it's important to have someone who sends you in the right direction and maps it out for you at an early time. And also just sort of hard work and commitment, and actually that you're allowed to have fun at work. Isn't that? I didn't understand that when I was young. I thought, I'm getting paid. It doesn't matter if I'm enjoying myself, but that's not a sort of sustainable way to build a career, is it? So Mark taught me a lot of that. Very briefly, another one, I'm not going to name this, but I'll tell you someone who was hugely influential at that same time when I was working out there. First time I ever came across the full-on product of US Ivy League universities. And a couple of people that I worked with, one guy in particular, who just showed this astonishing degree of self-confidence that was completely alien to a Scottish person that grew up just outside Glasgow. And that was really important because it sort of shows that, don't apologise for your own existence. And he was likeable, don't get me wrong, very likeable guy, but have a bit of confidence in yourself. Don't be afraid to approach people, talk to people, phone people. Fundamentally, that's okay, but that's really not the Scottish way, as you know, where you sort of apologise for your own existence every 15 seconds. So I learned a lot from him. Other things along the way, I had my first boss at Baillie Gifford. He was very illustrative. The thing that sticks in my mind there, he said to me one day, Stuart, don't be afraid of silence, which was his diplomatic way of saying stop babbling on, which based on today, I may not have learned that lesson all that well. I think there's lots of, it's back to my point actually, but it's constantly, it's picking up ways to get better all the time from wherever you might be interacting. And then one other thing I'll tell you, which did influence me, this is a bit sort of standard podcast answer, but actually was a book. So the first book that Taleb wrote, Nicholas Nassim Taleb, and he's famous for Black Swan and whatever. He wrote a book before that called Fooled by Randomness, which is, I think, actually quite readable. And it basically is all about don't be so confident. The path that happened is only one of many paths that might have happened. So don't think you're so smart that you mapped everything out and it all happened inevitably. Think, it's this understanding of probabilities and actually an appreciation of luck. Now, don't get me wrong, we should always prepare and work hard and be ready and try and do the right things. But you know what? So much of what happens to us is just the stars align at the right time. And I think that's quite a useful thing to bear in mind.
I love it though, but I think also the luck you can come to you because of the decisions you make to chase things that seem irrational or wild or adventurous at the time. For example, that going to Hong Kong maybe didn't meet everyone's approval, but yet it's how you coincided with some of these people who've ended up being influential. So
yeah, so you can tilt things in your favour. And we do this at Baillie Gifford all the time now is, you can't be right all the time. You can constantly learn, you can analyse, you can work hard, you can get a good team around you, you can do all the right things, but you still need a bit of luck. And I just think it's good to remember that both in business and in life. I mean, it's, you and I are sitting here having fun chatting on a podcast. We're very privileged to be working in the finance industry. I fundamentally don't believe the notion that I was always destined for this. You're not. You do the right things, but anything can happen.
Well, you've already littered this with quite a lot of great words of wisdom. And my last question is usually to sum it up with one creed or motto or advice for your younger self. If you've anything left over from all you've already shared, can you?
My advice to my younger self, which I would have completely disregarded, is that do something worthwhile. I think you learn that at a later point. And I don't just mean for personal satisfaction, but I also think that it provides security in your life and in your career. If you are doing something that is valuable to somebody else, there will be a demand for it. There will be an ongoing demand for it. Of course, the world changes and adapts, but fundamentally, people are going to want to do business with you. They're going to want to know you. And that may seem very obvious, but I think a lot of people, it's not that obvious. People often have a sort of zero-sum game attitude to things. And I'm going to win at someone else's expense. I think that probably was my mentality at a very young age. And that's actually not consistent with sort of long-term success. I would have advised myself that, now that's a bit rich because I think I've kind of ended up in that place anyway, but that's back to my point. I think it was more by accident than by design. So I don't know if that's very actionable advice, but, it is that. Am I actually making somebody else's life better? And if you think about it, that's not charity. That's a way of securing your own sort of long-term place in the world.
I love that. Well, there are echoes there of this kind of philosophy of abundance, away from this philosophy of scarcity and towards abundance and creating and that compounding effect of creating value. And I don't think there's anything wrong with still keeping a shred of that young boy from outside Glasgow, because I think not so much in terms of apologizing. I think where I see the importance of on ongoing is that sense of, is this enough? Are we doing enough? Are we relevant enough? Are we moving enough to match our evolving clients' needs? And clearly that is a question you keep posing both to yourself and to your team. And thank you for posing it here, making us think about it, and for sharing your other insights with us.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. Thank you. It's wonderful fun to talk about these things. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
I'm Aoife Devitt. Thank you for listening to the 50 Faces podcast. If you liked what you heard and would like to tune in to hear more inspiring investors and their personal journeys, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find all of our content on the 50 Faces Hub, where you'll find a library of role models, resources, and other solutions to enhance your career. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice, and all views are personal and should not be attributed to the organisations and affiliations of the host or any guest.